Um, Good morning and welcome to a... Yeah, we ready to go? Okay. Welcome to a short but hopefully a relevant series. Before we start, I just wanted to... Sorry, it's a little bit of housekeeping. We have a 2-week series now until the end of the school term. Then we normally break for school holidays, but I just wanted to let you know so that people can plan accordingly. The first 2 weeks of the new term, we're not actually going to be doing the Thursday morning because I've just come back. I just come back from obviously this trip, but actually I have to go back again for a good thing. In a few weeks, I've been asked to do a teacher training over there for a bunch of Jewish studies teachers for a week. So I'm going to miss it for 2 weeks. So we're actually going to do this today and next week, a short series. Then we're going to break for 4 weeks, and the new series will start on the 8th of August. So just diarize that. Okay. I just wanted people to plan ahead, otherwise people get mixed up. So, I hope I'm going to make some sense today. I'm still a bit shell-shocked. It was a bit of a whirlwind trip in and out of New York. Very, very special. I was there for a bar mitzvah of my nephew, the son of my brother that passed away a few years ago. And it was a very, very emotional but very, very special simcha. Met some amazing people. I think some of it is relevant maybe to the next topic that we'll do, but I'll bring that in when we get there. Okay, so this mini-series that we're doing today and next week is based on a small formula, which is based on something that is written in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, which we've quoted off and on in various different discussions. And what we're going to discuss, interestingly enough, ties in a little bit with the series we just finished, which is the series on channeling. But it's put into a context of a very interesting formula. So today what we're going to do is give a bit of introduction to the formula, and then do part 1 of the formula that's actually brought. It's interesting that it's a short passage which we'll look at in a minute, which Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, encourages us how to behave in certain ways, and in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, it's quoted in the context of how one wakes up in the morning. Meaning it's not just an instruction of how to live one's life effectively, but it's also an instruction on how to get up with a good mindset. We've quoted before from Kabbalistic writings, which is also backed up by more modern research, that the way we wake up in the morning, our thoughts in the morning, our mindset set of how we wake up in the morning affects the day. Spiritually, Kabbalistically, the way this works is that the Zohar tells us that our first thoughts and speech and actions of the day actually become the conduit for the life energy that flows through the day, comes through the first part of the day. It's a very interesting idea. And therefore the way we wake up in the morning, which also has something to do with the way we go to sleep at night, but that's a separate discussion. But the way we wake up in the morning, if we wake up with the right mindset, with a positive mindset, with a confident mindset, it actually affects our day. So therefore in Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, this particular passage, which we're going to look at in a moment, is quoted in the context of how one should wake up in the morning. It's in the laws, in the chapter which deals with waking up in the morning. Okay. How we get out of bed. Yeah. So what I want to do with you is first of all read the passage, and it's a passage we've quoted once before, but I want to read the passage and then discuss some of its aspects. So the passage is in the fifth chapter of Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, and it says the following. It says that Yehuda, Judah, one of the great sages, the son of Tamar, would say the following. And what he said is 4 lessons we learn from 4 animals. He said, be bold, or as some translations is brazen. The word in Hebrew is az, which comes from the same word which means like brazenness. Be brazen, bold as a leopard. light as an eagle, swift as a deer, mighty as a lion, strong as a lion, to do the will of your Father in heaven. In other words, if you want to serve God, if you want to live the life consistent with His values, ethics, morals, and so on, we need to be these four things. We need to be bold, light, whatever that means, we'll talk about that, swift and mighty, like a leopard, an eagle, a deer, and a lion, in order to do His will. So the first thing we need to understand before we discuss the specifics of this, right, is why do we need examples from animals? What is the Mishnah trying to tell us? In other words, what's the message here by specifically learning from animals? This is an interesting idea which is quoted in the Talmud about lessons that we learn from animals, right? Some of these animals are non-kosher animals, which is interesting. Leopard. Some of them are predators, damaging animals. And we understand that a person should be bold in a positive way. Light, swift, mighty, strong, whatever that means, and we'll talk about that. In a positive way, in a spiritual way, in a value-based way. But what does it mean that we need to learn these things from animals? And the idea behind it is that there's an interesting verse quoted in the book of Eov, in the book of Job, which says the following. Oh, it doesn't say it. Sorry. I thought it said it on the slide. I'll quote it for you. It says, Eov said, Malpeinu, he turned to God and he said, teach us, or he who teaches us, mi behemot aretz, from the animals, through the animals of the earth, and God makes us wise through the birds of the heaven. Okay. And the Talmud has a very interesting piece on this that talks about some animals, not the animals quoted in this Mishnah. And the Talmud says a very interesting thing. We know a couple of weeks ago we celebrated Shavuot, which was the festival when God gave us the Torah, right? And with the Torah comes lots of different things, the mitzvot, the commandments, the ethics, the morals, everything that we are given as part of a package deal to live a life of meaning and purpose. I should ask someone just to press that green button there, because it's really getting very hot in there. Just to press it in, thanks. Sorry. There we are. Excellent, thank you. The Talmud says, an interesting passage. The Talmud says that if the Torah wasn't given, if it wouldn't have been given, which is an interesting hypothesis in its own right, because spiritually, Jewishly, we learn that the purpose of creation was, the Torah is a blueprint for creation, and creation is only given in order for us to use the Torah, the moral compass of the Torah, in order to live a life of meaning and so on. But anyway, so the Talmud says, had the Torah not been given, we would learn some of the values from animals. For example, it says, we would learn tzniut mechatul. We'd learn modesty from a cat. Apparently cats are modest, they don't sort of, when they clean themselves, they're very modest about it, and so on and so forth. Gazel min mala, we would learn the value against theft from ants. Apparently ants have a whole system of how they store food. And they don't take from each other. They store in the summer for the winter, or something like that. And they are very careful not to take from each other. They store themselves, and they don't steal from each other, right? Ayarot miyona, we would learn faithfulness, fidelity in relationships from a dove. Apparently doves are very, very faithful to their partners. And so on and so forth, right? So the Talmud has this thing that if the Torah wasn't given, we'd be able to learn these concepts from animals. What's the idea behind this? Why do we need to know that? Why is that important to know? I mean, the Torah was given, so what do we need to know from animals? And it goes back to this heart of this passage, that we need to be as bold as a leopard or light as an eagle. Well, why is that so important? And really, the explanation behind this is that it goes to the heart of what we discussed in the last series. And that is that, number one, what God is teaching us, or what the Talmud is teaching us, is that nothing in this world doesn't have a purpose. And that everything that exists has a meaning. Everything that exists has a lesson. Or to extend it even beyond that to what the Baal Shem Tov taught very famously, he said that anything that a person sees or observes, you can always learn a moral lesson from. You can always learn there's something to learn from what one experiences or one sees, right? That's number one. Therefore, if God created the animals, the animal kingdom, which is a vast kingdom, it's a huge kingdom, right? So intricate, so many thousands and millions of animals and so on and so forth. Each animal has to have a purpose. Now we know that besides some of them being meat that we can eat, but the many animals we can't eat. The Torah actually discourages us from eating many, many animals. Some animals are not meant to be eaten altogether, right? By anyone. Nevertheless, and some of the animals we know are more damaging than others. Some are predators. Some on the surface seem to be destructive animals, right? But yet God says whatever God creates, there's a lesson. And not only there's a lesson, but there's a lesson to be learned in a positive way. And what we need to understand is what we discussed in last series, that we can take something that even in that animal, if what that particular trait is experienced in a negative way, because the brazenness of a leopard is not always exercised in a good way, or the strength of a lion and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, the lesson for us means that we can take it and channel it in some positive context. Right? To kind of take that a step further, the lesson behind that is with regard to the animal within ourselves. Because we've talked about this many times, that we all have an animal. Right? We have what's called the animal soul and the godly soul. We have animalistic drives and we have godly drives. We have the animal within us and the spirit within us. We have the parts of us that drive us towards materialism, hedonism, arrogance, ego, and material pursuit. And then we have the part of us that drives us towards a life of meaning and purpose, right? And we've talked about this many times, that the idea is not to discount or to negate or to destroy or to ignore the animal within us. The idea is to channel it. Because the animal within us has tremendous power. And sometimes it has more power than the soul within us. It's more passion, more power, more strength than the soul within us. And therefore the lesson that we learn about learning from animals on the outside actually is really an expression of the importance of learning from the animal inside. To understand that we all have an animal, and the animal is good. The animal has good parts in it. That's the gist of what we just discussed in the last series, but it fits right into this formula as well. Right? And then there's an interesting little twist here as well. Just to go back to this Mishnah, the passage, 1 second. Stop working, okay? So, if you remember the passage says, it quotes the person. Now we have a tradition that goes like this. I guess also in the spirit of nothing happens by chance, right? In Pirkei Avot, we have an interesting thing. Pirkei Avot is a very interesting, the Ethics of the Father is a very interesting collection of Mishnaic passages. Unlike most of the Mishnah, incidentally, right? Most of the Mishnah is very legalistic. Most of the Mishnah are laws to do with how we conduct ourselves every day, laws of blessings, laws of prayer, laws of damages, laws of employee-employee relationships, laws of marriage, and so on and so forth, right? That's what the Mishnah is. However, Ethics of the Father is a very particular, unique... Okay. It's a very particular... Doesn't matter. It's a very particular, unique sort of collection of passages in that it's ethics. It's about morals, about social interactions, about effective relationships. It's about elevating ourselves, refining ourselves, and so on and so forth. And in every passage of Pirkei Avot, right, which is the Ethics of the Fathers, we call it, is we always have an author of that particular statement, right, of who said these particular things. And what the Kabbalists do is very interesting. They say nothing's but by chance. I mean, the lessons in themselves are very important. But why is it so important to know who said what? Why is that always so important? I mean, from an historic perspective, it's nice to know about the different sages who lived in different times, what they said, and who they said, and what came before who, and who came before who, and so on and so forth. However, it's just not that simple. It's much deeper than that. And that is because the mystics tell us that every time we have a passage, particularly in Pirkei Avot, particularly in the Ethics of the Fathers, about a particular way of conduct, about a particular way of behaving ourselves, the one who said it is also significant. It's either got to do with the particular history of that person or might have to do with the name of that person. And in this particular passage about being as bold as a leopard and so on and so forth, the author of that particular passage is Yehuda ben Tema. Right? Yehuda ben Tema. So what does that mean? So the Kabbalists explain a fascinating thing. Where does the name Yehuda come from? Right? Sorry? Judah, right? Yeah. In fact, later on, Yehuda was one of the 12 tribes. Later on, all of the Jewish people became known as Yehudim, right? We all have and there's a reason for that actually. But the origin, the history of the name Yehuda is a name of gratitude, but it's a name also of submission. It was given by Leah, one of the matriarchs, when she had her son Yehuda, her fourth son, and she said, Hapam odet Hashem, this time I'm going to give thanks. I'm going to acknowledge the greatness of God and the gift of God, which is the word odeh. I will acknowledge, I will thank, which is the same word as hoda'ah, which is Yehuda. Right? Also the term Yehuda, the name Yehuda, we are taught, has the name of God embedded in it. You realize that, right? The name of God is Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. Yehuda has a daled, but has all the letters of God in the word Yehuda. So you have the name of God embedded in it. What is that? Putting it all together, what does Yehuda actually symbolize? It symbolizes humility. It symbolizes surrender. It symbolizes submission, acknowledgement of something that's higher than us. Right? Because as we discussed in the last series, channeling animalistic traits or channeling negative emotions, or in the context of this discussion, learning certain traits from animals, which might be animals that are on the surface negative in many ways, is critically important because we understand the strength of that particular animal. It's critically important, but it's dangerous. Why is it dangerous? Because some of these traits lend themselves very easily to be used negatively, lend themselves to be used in an egocentric way, lend themselves to be used in an arrogant way, right? I mean, brazenness, which we'll talk about in a second, which we learn from a leopard, essentially the best way to translate it is chutzpah, right? Most people have chutzpah not in a good way, right? We'll talk about that in a minute. Chutzpah is not a trait, we'll see how good it could be, but it's not a trait that can be automatically good. In other words, it's a trait which is often, chutzpah people are very difficult people, generally speaking, right? People are filled with chutzpah. They're annoying people. They're like, you ever got off the phone and you said, what a chutzpah, right? That's, by the way, chutzpah is one of the few Hebrew words that has found itself formally into the English dictionary. Do you know that? Yeah. Everyone knows what chutzpah is. They can't pronounce it half the time, but right? But apparently, that's what I read just recently. Apparently, it's actually official, an official word, right? You know why? Because some of these words, particularly like the way it's used in Yiddish, actually are not translatable, right? You can list like 15 adjectives to describe what chutzpah is, but nothing comes to the word chutzpah. You know what I'm saying? Like, right? I don't also like brazenness. I mean, there's different things, but right? But chutzpah is chutzpah, right? And az, when we learn from a leopard, to be bold, brazen, is actually chutzpah. It's called azut panim, which is the best translation of chutzpah, right? So when you so as an example, if you take something like chutzpah, which we learn from a leopard is the chutzpah of a leopard is not necessarily good by default, and chutzpah by most people is not good by default. Normally, it's pretty arrogant, it's probably egocentric, and therefore it's probably used in a negative way. It's used to promote someone, it's used to promote someone ineffectively, it's used to put other people down, it's used to ignore people and damage people on the way without worrying about it, without caring about it. It's quite a negative thing. And therefore, when we learn from an animal who has tremendous chutzpah, we'll soon see, and learn from an animal that has that trait, and we need to absorb it and to channel it into a positive context, because we need to understand that there's a great lesson behind that particular trait. There's an introduction, there's a foundation. And the foundation is Yehuda. We have to be humble. Because we have to make sure that it's not ego-based. Right? We have to make sure, and that's why it's always dangerous. Often there are many, many traits and many, many emotions that it's safer to stay away from. Right? Much safer to stay away from. If you stay away from chutzpah, it's pretty safe. But it's not as effective. And therefore the Mishnah is saying you have to have chutzpah. But it has to be based on Yehuda. Because Yehuda means submission. Yehuda means bringing a sense of godliness into it. Yud and Hey and Vav, God's name, into the equation. Acknowledging there's something higher. Making sure that it's value-based. Making sure that it's not in self-interest, but rather it's to achieve something effective. To achieve something moral. To achieve something valuable. That's what Yehuda is. When you have the foundation of Yehuda, and just to take a step further, the Ben Tamar is also significant. The son of Tamar. Tamar is an Aramaic word, which means to respond, right? To respond to something else, to something higher. We are taught that when we learn Torah, for example, when we serve God, we're responding to something greater than ourselves. Same idea. So Yehuda and Ben Tema is this concept of acknowledging a higher existence, a higher source, something greater than ourselves, something that we have to surrender to, something we have to look towards for direction, for inspiration, for morals, for values as a moral compass, and so on. When we have the foundation of Yehuda Ben Tema, then we're able to learn from the animals. If we don't have that foundation, then learning from the animals could be destructive. It could be quite bad. And that's why the Mishnah is structured in a very, very important way. It says Yehuda Ben Tema Omer. It's Yehuda Ben Tema when you create the foundation of humility, surrender, and direction, responding to something greater than ourselves. Then Omer, then it says the following. Then it teaches the following, and it becomes a positive and strong and very effective process. Okay. So what are we learning? So today what I want to do is just do the leopard part. Next week we'll do the eagle, the deer, and the lion. So, okay, this was not working. Okay, so as the kanemer, the Mishnah says, be bold as a leopard, brazen as a leopard. Right? Now what's very fascinating is, as we said, azut, the word az, comes to the word azut or azut panim, which is chutzpah essentially, right? Which chutzpah is not a good thing. In fact, what's really strange is that the Mishnah is so worried about using the chutzpah in the wrong way that the very same passage, when it finishes talking about the 4 lessons we learn from the animal, the very same passage says, azut panim legehenom, that if someone is filled with chutzpah that leads to bad stuff, uboshet panim legan eden, and humility, shyness, refinement leads a person to paradise. Right? The very same Mishnah tells us that azut panim is a bad thing. And yet in the beginning of the passage it says we should be as bold and as a leopard, right? Another thing we find that it's not serious, it doesn't work, it's fine. Manage. Another thing we find is that in fact the Talmud tells us that one of the brands, one of the signs, you could say, the hallmarks of a Jewish soul, of the Jewish nation, Talmud says these 3 things, that the Jews by default naturally possess 3 very important and very beautiful traits, and that is Baishanim, Rachmanim, V'gomlei Chasadim. Baishanim means they are bashful. By nature we're supposed to be reserved, not showy, not out there. Right? The opposite of Azpanim, the opposite of chutzpah. More sort of refined, right? Thank you. Does it work? Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. We'll get there. Right. So, and then it says also Rachmanim, compassionate, kind, and so on and so forth, right? I'll just tell you a little story, just an amazing thing I just witnessed on this trip. Just the kindness, the sensitivity that some people have is just amazing. So, as I told you, I was there for my nephew's bar mitzvah, a very special bar mitzvah. And there was a lot of, not anxiety, there was a lot of nervousness leading up to our mitzvah because to make him happy, he's an orphan and it's just very hard. And he has an uncle, Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin, who's quite close to the person who lives in Monsey. And this person is a very well-off person and he owns this massive mansion, holiday house, right? Mm-hmm. And a couple of years ago he gave it to my nephew's uncle through his mother for his family to have Pesach there. And anyway, so my nephew wanted a smaller mitzvah. I guess he was nervous, he didn't want it all, a big do, he wanted something small. So for Shabbos there was this idea, and for Shabbos this family said, have the house, just take the house. We can all the family can go there, the uncles, the aunts, everyone can go there, there's enough rooms and stuff, and have the bar mitzvah there, which we did, and it was very, very beautiful. But that family that gave the just amazing the care people have. Like, not only they gave the house, but like, they wanted to send food, and they wanted, which wasn't all that necessary, but a couple of days before the Shabbos, she calls up my sister-in-law, her her name is Mrs. whatever her name is, but she calls her by social law. She says she wants to know. She lives in New York. I don't live in Monsey, but it's just where they go on holiday. She wants to know which ice cream the bar mitzvah boy likes, because she knows they're very special bar mitzvah, and she wants to make sure to send like a lot of ice cream, but she wants it to be the right flavor. I mean, like, what people think of, right? That's kindness, natural kindness. People are. I mean, there's so much good in people. It's amazing. Not always it's shown, but right, but it's amazing. So the hallmarks, it says, by shanim, we're bashful, rachmanim, compassionate, gomlei chasnim, kind. That's supposed to be three things that we're supposed to believe that we possess, and therefore we're supposed to work on revealing it and accessing it and igniting it and making sure that we have it, right? And then suddenly, what do we say? We have a Mishnah that tells us, az kanemer, be brazen like a leopard. Brazenness, boldness, chutzpah is not by shanim, it's not being bashful, it's not being reserved. So how does it all work? So what it obviously means is that there's a certain element of chutzpah which is good. In other words, like this. By shanim, to be bashful, to be shy, to be reserved, that's a sign of humility. It's a sign of not pushing ourselves forward. It's a sign of making room for other people, right? By the way, shyness doesn't mean in a negative sense that sort of insecure. Insecurity is not a good thing. It means someone who doesn't take up space, someone who's able to let other people go, doesn't have to be the center of attention, doesn't have to be this focused. In the background, he's very, very happy letting other people have the limelight. That's really what baishanut means in Hebrew, right? In a positive sense, right? Yet, we know, we talked about this last time, we need itkalanut. We need a bit of everything, because everything has some purpose. And therefore, the foundation, obviously, when we talk about the three hallmarks of what it means to have a Jewish soul, one of them is that humility, making room for others. But at the same time, although that's a foundation, and that's important because that's a sign of selflessness, a sign of letting the ego go, at the same time, we do need to bring in a certain element of chutzpah, good chutzpah. And the question is, what does good chutzpah mean? So apparently, and I don't understand a lot about animals, but apparently, one of the commentaries of the Mishnah tells us that the leopard, one of the things the leopard does is, a leopard is not a very strong animal, yet it acts like one, apparently. It's not as strong as a lion, it's not as strong as other animals, apparently, and in fact, it's quite weak, but it's fearless. A leopard is prepared to take a risk and to do something that is crazy, right? See, if we think about the definition of chutzpah, right? What is a person who's got, don't say it. Just think of someone that you know has a lot of chutzpah, right? Normally, what's the imagery you have of someone who's full of chutzpah, right? It's normally someone who's like got no restrictions, I'll just do anything. No inhibitions, right? No regard for restrictions, right? Unaware of limitations. Right? People put themselves forward to do things like, sometimes people are called upon to do things and just like the most ridiculous candidate comes forward. Like someone who's just totally unqualified, right? Unstoppable. Someone who doesn't care what other people are going to think. Doesn't care what anyone says, doesn't care what anyone feels, just they go for it. Someone gets hurt on the way, who cares? Someone doesn't like what I'm doing, who cares? No inhibitions, no regard for, not being in tune what other people are thinking, not being in tune with their own restrictions, their own inhibitions, their own capabilities, their own limitations, nothing. Right? That's the foundation of someone who's got chutzpah. Okay? And that's what a leopard is, apparently. However, that is an important thing. Within reason. It's an important thing for many reasons. First of all, as the Bar Tanura, one of the great commentators of the Mishnah says, he says, when it comes to learning, for example, we have Pirkei Avot tells us, Lo ha-baishan lamed. Someone, although we talked before about being baishan, being bashful is a good thing, but the Pirkei Avot says that a person who is bashful will not be able to study, will not be able to learn. You've got to have chutzpah. The student has to be able to say, no, I don't understand. And if the teacher explains it 3 times and I still don't understand, no, I need you to explain this to me in a respectful way, for a good reason, for the right focus, and so on, right? And generally it means when a person is able to reach higher than they think they're capable of. That's good chutzpah. Now obviously it needs to be done respectfully. It needs to be without hurting other people. It needs to be incrementally. It needs to be with some sort of reason and logic behind it. But the concept, right, The concept of not stopping, a concept of taking a risk, the concept of plunging into things that we don't think we can do, that's good chutzpah. That's azka nemer. The nemer, the leopard is not a strong animal, yet the leopard is prepared to take a risk. The leopard is prepared to present him or herself as a stronger animal than he or she really is, apparently. That's what it means, the chutzpah of a leopard, right? There are other animals that are stronger than leopard. Yet a leopard is right. The good part of that is that we all need to do that. We all need to learn to plunge into things, to do things, to aspire to things, to try things, to take a risk, to do things that we don't think fit into our level of qualification, to do things that we don't think fits into our level of expertise. It has a lot to do with what we discussed a number of series ago about the growth mindset, right? Not to be fixed, not to define our successes by the way we are now, right? If you remember correctly, the fixed mindset is a person who says, my definition of who I am is defined by what I'm able to achieve now. And that traps me, and that's who I am. And therefore I'm scared of failure, and therefore I'm scared to do anything more. I'm scared of hardship. I get very frustrated when things become difficult. When I make a mistake, either I get completely stressed or frustrated, or I blame other people. Because it can't be me. Because I am this. Therefore, if I make a mistake, it's a problem. Instead of using mistakes or failure as a learning tool, I just use it as a sense of frustration. Why? Because I'm fixed in who I am. This is who I am. I can't do more. But what I could do, I'm very successful at. And therefore, mistakes don't come into the equation. The growth mindset is a person who says, no, that I can do a lot more than I think I can. Because I have a soul, and the root of the soul, I have a godly energy, and the godly energy is undefined and infinite. Now, of course, I'm a person, I'm a human being, therefore I have limitations, and we have to be wise, and we have to be in tune with our own level of expertise. And yes, there are certain things that just don't fit into our level of expertise, right? I don't think I can ever become a car mechanic. I just wouldn't know what to do. I have two left hands, right? You wouldn't want to employ me to build your house, I promise you, right? I mean, it's frustrated me many times. I would love to. I can't even build a sukkah. Forget about building a house, right? It's just not one of the things that I'm going to learn this lesson of chutzpah from. And that's why I'll get someone to help me, right? But there are many things that are in my sphere, right? There are many things that are in my world that I've often thought I can't do, and we need to learn not to do that. We need to learn not to limit ourselves. We need to learn that we are much more capable than we think we are. Emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, on any level of life, on any layer of life. We are able to achieve much more than we think we can. That's one aspect of good chutzpah, right? Breaking barriers. Not to create those barriers around me. Not to accept ourselves the way we are now, but to push ourselves. To push ourselves. That's what growth is. And part of that growth is the willingness to make a mistake. Part of that growth is the willingness to fail. Because failure is a tool of growth. Right? Failure doesn't define us. Failure is just a teaching tool. So that's one very, very important aspect of chutzpah. The second is resisting social pressure. You see, a chutzpahniak, as they call them in Yiddish, is someone who doesn't care what other people think. Now that's a good thing and that's a bad thing generally, but it's also a good thing. Meaning it's a bad thing when you don't care what other people think when you hurt other people, right? In other words, when it's egocentric, when it comes without the Yehuda foundation, then the chutzpah person says, I don't care what other people think, I'm going to do what I want. But it's more normally in pursuit of selfish pursuits. And if other people don't like it, if I'm annoying them in the process, if I'm hurting them in the process, I really couldn't care less, right? That's bad chutzpah. But the chutzpah that we can learn from that, which is good chutzpah, is the concept which the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, says at the very, very beginning, when it talks about the mindset of how we wake up in the morning, and we commit to a day of morality, we commit to a day of value-based living, is to use the expression of the Shulchan Aruch, Al yevosh mipnei hamaligim. Do not become embarrassed in the face of those that scoff and make fun. Right? One of the most incredible forces that influence people is social pressure. either explicit social pressure or implied social pressure. In other words, fitting in with other people. Even when we know that fitting in with others is in a context of ineffective living or immoral living or things which aren't so acceptable or things that we should be doing, right? The idea to withstand social pressure is a very, very difficult thing. We learn it from our patriarch Abraham, right? Abraham Avinu grew up in a pagan culture, a pagan worship culture. And the expression that's used in the Talmud to describe Abraham is Echad Haya Abraham. Abraham was one and only. What does it mean, one and only? Not just put him on a pedestal. It means it's describing his tremendous strength. Abraham had chutzpah. What do you mean had chutzpah? He took on a whole world. He discovered within himself, he reached the moral conclusion that there's a God in the world. Monotheism was the way to go. He understood that the world doesn't make itself. He understood there's a higher being and therefore a higher purpose. And therefore he made it his mission. He set out on the journey to spread monotheism and to draw and attract people to that culture and that belief and therefore that value system. Very, very unpopular. It took a tremendous amount of chutzpah on Abraham's part to do that. And therefore, and yet, Echad Haya Abraham, he was able to do that. He took on an entire society. Why? Because he had chutzpah. He had the good chutzpah. On that level, he didn't care less what anyone thinks. Because he stood up for what was right. Now, the commentators explain, you have to be careful with this. Again, these things are dangerous. They're critical, and they're important, and they're valuable, but they are dangerous because they can very easily slip into an egocentric sort of expression, right? These things are very hard to tell sometimes. And sometimes when something starts off truthfully and starts off sincerely, it can very easily slip into an egocentric experience. And therefore, the commentators explain and they urge and they caution that when you have this kind of chutzpah and you resist social pressure and you stop caring what other people think, you need to make sure two things. First of all, you need to make sure that it's not an aggressive non-caring. In other words, you don't have to be telling everyone I don't care. It's more of a passive thing. It's more of a chutzpah that comes from within. It's more of a chutzpah which is based on humility. It's more of a chutzpah which is non-verbal chutzpah, non-brazen chutzpah, but it's a chutzpah. It's inner strength more than anything else. And second of all, it needs to not be confused. In other words, it needs to be balanced and needs to be kept together with caring for other people. Because when you resist social pressure, it takes a lot of chutzpah, and chutzpah means you don't care what other people think. The problem with that is that you end up not caring about other people altogether. Very easy to happen. And if you go back to the analogy of Abraham, for example, Abraham Avinu, our patriarch Abraham, had these two opposite traits unbelievably together. He was he had unbelievable chutzpah. He took on an entire world, an entire culture, an entire society, yet he cared for every single person. The hospitality, the kindness, the compassion that Abraham had was amazing. That even when he was after circumcision, after surgery, and he was at his tent, as the Chumash tells us, and he was sitting at the door, and it was a hot day, and it was angels, but what he thought to be people, which he looked like and acted like pagan worshippers, passed by his tent. He didn't say, pagan worshippers, let them go, jump in the lake. He ran after them and he said, please don't go. Please come in for a drink. Please come in for a meal. And was hospitable to them and cared for them and so on and so forth. Why? Because he had really good chutzpah. Chutzpah based on humility. Chutzpah based on the Yehudah foundation. Chutzpah based on morals and values. There was no sense, no hints, no trace of egocentricity there. It was just learning the goodness, the positivity that was available to him of the lesson that we learned from the leopard, but not the ego brazenness that comes with it. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Yeah. Coming with that, of course, also is the concept of, we talk about breaking barriers, but generally the idea of aiming high. Right? Aiming high. And not being afraid of things not being afraid of challenges. It's interesting, we're talking about this this week, but it's this week's weekly portion on a national level. What happened with this week's portion? We have the famous story of the spies who went to Israel. They were supposed to tour the land and come back and report about what the land of Israel looks like before the Jews were meant to cross the Jordan River and go and settle there, right? And they come back and they give the following report. And they were very severely punished, and God was very upset because they gave a negative report. And as a result, the Jewish people cried and they were afraid to go into the land, and it was a disaster. And God punished the Jewish people and he made them stay in the desert for 40 years before they actually go into the land of Israel, right? And the commentators will ask the question, it's a very strange thing. They actually didn't do anything wrong. They were asked to do a mission and they fulfilled what they were supposed to do. They were told to give a factual, accurate report of what the land of Israel looked like, and that's exactly what they did. They came back and they said, it's a beautiful land, it's a land of milk and honey, it's a land of fruit, amazing fruit, but it's a land that is very strong. It's a land that there's giants, it's a land which is fortified, it's a land which is very difficult to conquer. What was wrong with that? It's factual, right? That's exactly what they were supposed to do. And the answer is no. Because, yes, they were supposed to give a factual account of what took place in Israel, but they weren't supposed to give commentary. In other words, they weren't supposed to say, well, because there's fortified walls and there's great cities and there's great walls and it's protected and there's giants and therefore it's going to be too difficult to conquer. That wasn't the question. The question is, what does the land look like? The question is, of course we can conquer it. The question is only how, that's all. The question is what the strategy is going to be. What are we going to do? You know, how much belief do we have to have in God? A small amount or a big amount, that's all. Right? And the Jews fell into the trap. They didn't have chutzpah. They didn't have the chutzpah of saying, who cares how strong it is? We can still do it. Why? Because God promised it to us. And it's the place where we're supposed to be. And it's the place where we're supposed to go. So it's going to be difficult, so it'll be difficult. Right? They didn't have the azut, they didn't have that strength, that brazenness from the leopard in a good way. Because they didn't aim high. And it's an amazing thing because in our own lives we're also supposed to do that. Again, we're supposed to be honest and reflective about our own capabilities and limitations, but at the same time, there's an amazing passage in the Talmud where the Talmud says that every person should say, when are my deeds going to emulate those of our patriarchs and matriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, etc. Right? Which is a really chutzpah thing to say. What do you mean, when are my deeds going to... Who are you? I mean, talking about the greats, right? The giants, the spiritual giants, our patriarchs and matriarchs. What do you mean, when are my deeds? And the answer is no, I'm never going to reach them, but I have to aim for them. So that's what good chutzpah is. Good chutzpah means aiming high. Don't set the goalposts short. We should set ourselves big goalposts. Again, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, everything. We should set ourselves big goals, high goals. When are my deeds going to reach those of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? That's what we're supposed to do. And then, slowly, take steps towards those big goals. Because if you have big goals, you might not reach them, but you reach more than you thought you would, because your goalposts are high. Because your chutzpah is strong. Good chutzpah, based on Yehuda, based on humility, based on values. Then it's an important and critical thing to have. I was looking around on this concept of chutzpah, and I just saw a little cute thing I'll share with you. A guy called Guy Kawasaki or something was Steve Jobs' original marketing man. So I don't think he was Jewish, but he talked about chutzpah. I guess because he walked in New York with a lot of Jewish people. Right? And he described chutzpah like this. He says, it's like calling up tech support to report a bug on pirated software. Anyway. And then he went on to explain that chutzpah was the key to Apple's success. Anyway, that's just... It's interesting that we find this in leadership, right? We find this in leadership a lot. We find that leaders had a certain element of chutzpah when they needed to. Chutzpah not towards people, but chutzpah toward God even, right? Now again, one has to be careful with how we speak about this, because one place where we're not supposed to display chutzpah is towards God, but there were certain Jewish leaders we find in history, interestingly enough, that were even strong with God as a leader. Again, it was completely selfless. And on their level, they were able to do that because they knew there was no trace of self-interest there. One of them was Abraham himself, right? Not only did he have chutzpah to take on the world, but he took on God. He took on God when God wanted to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? We have the most amazing piece in the Torah, where God has a conversation with Abraham, and Abraham is quite strong with God. And he says to God, so you got to save the city. God says, no, but it's a wicked city, it's an evil city. He says, but maybe, it's not nice for you to do this. People will say you're not a nice God. Maybe there's like 50 people that are good, and save them on their account. God said, there isn't. Anyway, he does the whole, until he sees it getting nowhere, and obviously it was meant to be. But he took on God, he had chutzpah. That's what a Jewish leader does. Moses did the same thing. Moses was sent to Pharaoh to ask Pharaoh to redeem the Jewish people, to send the Jewish people out of Egypt. and things got worse for a time being, and he went back to God and he said, Lama hara'eta tavdecha, why are you making it worse? You sent me as a leader, I'm going to be a leader. A leader is a people who fight. A leader is a person who advocates on behalf of his flock. A leader is a person who stands up for his people. So I'm standing up for them, even with that strength towards God and so on and so forth. Right? So that's the chutzpah on a leadership level. So just to end off with a little concept that was said by one of the Hasidic Rebbes called Rav Shmuel of Lubavitch. And he said the following thing. He was known for this word. He said it was called in Yiddish, it was called lechatchila ariber. Lechatchila means, he said the following. He said, the world says, he says, people say, often the culture is, in other words, that when you encounter an obstacle, you negotiate the obstacle. In Yiddish it works much better. I'll say it in Yiddish and I'll translate it. He said, people say, amikenish tarunter gate min ariber, which means that if you can't, like the imagery was you go on the street and you see an obstacle, right? So you try to go underneath it, and if you can't fit, eventually you see it's not going to work, so you jump over it, right? Ich sag, he said, I say, lechatchila river, just jump over to begin with. What did he mean? He meant like this, again, same idea. Often what happens is, when we go through the experiences of life, we get very caught up with challenges. We get very caught up with the excuses that prevent us from growing, prevent us from learning, prevent us from taking the next step in our growth, going out of our comfort zone and so on and so forth. Even when we committed to growth, even when we committed to doing the right thing, even when we committed to growing as a human being, we get very bogged down by the things that stand in the way. Directly stand in the way, indirectly stand in the way, whatever the case is, right? And we negotiate the challenges. We fight with the challenges. Right? And often what that does is, it just makes us negative. It makes us caught up in the confusion and the difficulties of the challenges that we face. The chutzpah aspect is, this is what he said, Rav Shmuel, he said, I say, just lechatchila, but don't negotiate the obstacle, and then eventually when you find you can't go underneath, jump over. I say, just jump over to begin with. Ignore the challenge. Be confident. Have that brazenness, have that strength, that challenges are there to overcome. Yes, there are challenges. We have challenges all the time. And we're not saying to ignore the challenges. Challenges are real. Often more real. Sometimes they perceive challenges. Sometimes they're challenges that we make up in our own head, but often they're real challenges. Whatever they are, our confidence, our strength has to be in a way where we're able to just jump over. That's the chutzpah. That's azkanamar. That's the strength, the brazenness that we learn from a leopard in a good way. We all have a leopard. We all have animal within us. That's what we started with. We all have the animal within us, and those animals have some bad traits, but we can learn from them. God created the animal for a reason, because to teach us on the foundation of Yehuda, on the foundation of humility, of how we have to do it. And going back to the very, very beginning, as I said, this passage in Pirkei Avot, which talks about the leopard, the eagle, the deer, and the lion, is actually cited in the Code of Jewish Law of how we wake up in the morning. Because going back to what we began with, the way we wake up in the morning is the way the day goes, right? The way we start the day is very, very foundational in terms of how the whole day is going to go. When we wake up in the morning, the concept of waking up in the morning, this is the idea of Modeh, for example, wake up in the morning, we're fresh. There's a certain freshness in the morning, there's a certain purity in the morning, right? There's a certain spirituality, holiness in the morning. God, we have a tradition that our soul gets freshens up throughout the night and God gives it back to us in the morning. A new day, a bright day, a fresh day. Every day is new. Every day is a new opportunity, a new concept. But when we wake up in the morning, we're also aware of what the day has ahead, right? You know, we talked about this in the mindfulness concept. Sometimes we wake up in the morning, we're already busy thinking about all the problems that can possibly happen in the morning. But the mindful possibly happen during the day. But the mindful way of waking up is this, to be in the moment. In other words, to be in the moment of waking up. To commit to the day, to wake up with gratitude, to wake up with strength, and to wake up with an attitude of good chutzpah. To say, right now it's fresh, right now it's a new opportunity. This opportunity is one I'm going to maximize, it's one I'm going to use to its fullest. I know there's going to be challenges during the day. I know there's going to be perceived things that are going to stand in my way, that are going to talk me into it, that there's limitations. I know there's going to be social pressure throughout the day. I know there's going to be times where I think that maybe it's not for me, but that's not the way I'm waking up. I'm waking up as a kanemer, strong, brazen like a leopard, with the commitment to have that chutzpah throughout the day, to overcome those obstacles, to jump over, not to negotiate and to get tangled in the obstacles, but to just jump over them and ignore them, to aim high, to withstand the social pressure in a positive way, and to move forward and to grow, to maximize the opportunity that God has given me with the soul that He gave me back as I wake up in the morning. And that's the lesson from the leopard. Now, next, just to remind, just for those who came in a bit later, so a couple of things. First of all, this is a short series, just this week and next week. And then we're having a 4-week break because 2 weeks from the holidays and 2 weeks are going to be away, as I said. So we're going to start again the 8th of August. Next week we'll talk about the lessons from the eagle, the deer, and the lion. I just wanted to say next week, also being the last Thursday of the term, as we always do, we're going to draw the raffle. There's one more week to go. If for whatever reason you haven't bought a raffle ticket, or you haven't bought enough raffle tickets, or you know someone that hasn't bought a raffle ticket, we have 1 week to go, so spread the word and let's make it happen. Thank you so much and have a wonderful week.